Chapter 13 Where No Svart Will Ever Tread. Jurathor grunted and picked up a lump of stone and tossed it into the hole. It glanced off the smooth cliff and rocketed out of sight past a bend in the shaft. For an age the hollow crashing of its fall was heard, then silence, and, when all but Finodri had judged that was the end, a single final thump. "We must go down there," whispered Susan. "And before our courage fails. Jurathor, will Valham aid us here?" "Nay, cousin, the magic is mine alone, and I could not take you, for she was made for elves and finds my unburdened way to trial." "It is as I thought. Will you stay here, then, lest Svarts roll boulders on our heads?" "That I can do, and will." "Good. Colin, Susan, follow me. Step where I step. Do not hurry. So we shall come safe to the end." Finodri began to climb down the oblique first pitch of the shaft, jamming himself into the angle between the two rock faces. Loose stones rattled down before him, and only the biggest sounded the end of their fall. "There is room for both of you here," he called from the bend. "Come singly. Colin first." Colin lowered himself over the edge into the gully and worked his way down to within a yard of Finodri. "That is near enough," said the dwarf. "Susan!" "Yes?" "Stop when you are as close as your brother as he is to me. We must not crowd each other." "Right." It was unpleasant to crowd there helplessly while a river of stones bounced off head, shoulders and knuckles, but Susan was not long about it. "This is the problem," said Finodri when the clatter of debris had faded away. "The shaft is like a bent knee, and we are in the crook. Therefore the slope down which we can climb is on the opposite side from us. It is steeper too, but I think I see a way. Across there, about 5 feet down, is a ledge. If we jump from here and grasp the ledge, we shall be well on our road." "We shall be if we miss," said Susan. "The deed is nothing. It is the thought that breeds fear, and we achieve little by lingering." And Finodri jumped. His fingers scratched for the rock, caught it, and he lay against the sloping wall of the shaft, and did not speak or move. At first the children thought he was unconscious, but they were soon to find for themselves how easy it was to be winded in such a fall. "It is a good hold," said Finodri. He eased himself a couple of feet from the ledge, and took up a secure position astride a corner of the shaft. "Throw me your light." "But what if you drop it?" said Colin. "I shall not drop it." Colin let the lamp fall, and the dwarf caught it in both hands. "Now jump! You cannot miss!" "Can't I?" thought Colin. He had a brief impression of blackness stretching under him, and of the ledge hurtling upwards, before the air was squashed from his lungs by vicious impact with the rock. Blue and red stars exploded in his brain, and a vacuum formed where his lungs should have been. But Finodri's steadying hand was in the small of his back, and his senses cleared. Colin realised that his fingers had closed upon the ledge and were holding him, although he was numb from the elbows down. When the children and Finodri had recovered from the effects of the drop, they considered the next stage of their journey. Colin was perched just below Finodri, while Susan had pulled herself onto the ledge and was wishing she could spare a hand to massage her aching ribs. It felt as though every bone in her body had been shaken loose by her fall. "There are no more bends for a distance," said Finodri, "but whether there is safe passage I cannot tell." The V-shaped gully continued for 30 feet, and they made good progress. Finodri held the lamp, leaving Colin and Susan both hands free, but light was still a problem. For when Finodri was above the children, their shadows hid the rock below, causing them to grope blindly for holds, and when he was below, it was difficult for him to shine the light without blinding them. He could, however, direct their feet to holds that he had tested, so they decided on this order of descent. At the foot of the gully, 3 sides of the shaft opened out like the shoulder of a bottle, leaving the remaining side, the all but sheer rock face, within reach. "We can't go down there," said Colin, aghast. "It's as smooth as ice." "The eyes of men were ever blind," said Finodri. "Can you not see the crevices and the ledges?" The children peered down the shaft, but still it seemed to them impassable. "Ah, well, you must put your trust in me, that is all. We shall rest here a little, for there will be no haven after this until we near the end." He called up the shaft. "Is all quiet with you, cousin?" "Aye, though the chill of this place is beyond belief. It is well I have my cloak. Svarts draw nearer, but they move slowly. I fear they will not come in time." "Are you ready?" said Fenodri to the children. "As ready as we shall ever be, I suppose," said Susan. "Good. Colin, you are well lodged, so your sister will go first. I shall clear a way for you as far as I can. Have patience, and rest while I am gone, for it will be a hard climb." Fenodri let himself down to the full extent of his arms, and scuffed around with his toes until he had found and cleared a ledge. Then he searched for a lower fingerhold, and in this way slowly began the descent. The wall was not quite as smooth as Colin and Susan had thought, but the accumulated sand of years rendered the many cracks and projections invisible to the children's eyes. Minutes or hours later, for it seemed an eternity in the nothingness of the shaft, the children heard Fenodri returning. Colin switched on the lamp, and the dwarf's face, lined in grey with effort, came into view. "All is clear, or nearly so. We must not delay now." Colin handed him the lamp, and Fenodri climbed down to the first station, from which he guided Susan onto the rock face. As soon as she was immediately above him, he descended a little further, and soon Colin was left alone to his thoughts. Susan and Fenodri moved quickly, for the holds were precarious, giving no more than finger and toe room, and often barely that. To remain still for more than a few seconds was to be in serious danger of falling. Yet momentum was hard to check, and Susan more than once came near to losing control of her speed. But, with Fenodri's help, she achieved a balance between these two fatal extremes. Colin had nothing to do but to avoid cramp and to watch the dwindling oblong of light and his sister's foreshortened silhouette. And as he looked, he gradually became aware of an optical illusion. Being in total darkness himself, he could see nothing of the shaft except the small area lit by the lamp in Fenodri's hand, and as this drew further away, his sense of perspective and distance was lost, so that he seemed to be looking at a picture floating in space, a moving cameo that shrank but did not recede. He was so fascinated by this phenomenon that he barely noticed the cold or the strain of being wedged in one unalterable position. The patch of light contracted until it appeared to be no bigger than a matchbox, and Colin was wondering how deep the shaft could possibly be, when the light was extinguished. But before he had time to be seriously alarmed, he heard Fenodri's voice shouting up to him, though what the message was he had no idea, for distance and the shaft reduced it to a foggy booming, out of which not a single intelligible word emerged. Still, the tone of the voice held no urgency, so he presumed that Susan was at the bottom and that Fenodri was on his way up, which in fact was what the dwarf had intended him to understand, and Colin had not long to wait before the lamp flashed on a yard below where he was sitting. "Oh," said Fenodri, "I am a sight weary of this shaft. Jorathor." "Aye." "When we are below, I shall call. What of the Svarts?" "They went by another road. More follow." The shelf on which Susan was resting lay at the foot of the wall. At this point there was a kink in the shaft, like the bend of a drain pipe, and Fenodri had said that the true bottom of the shaft was not far below. Susan flexed her fingers and wriggled her toes. The bulk of the descent had not been too bad, once she had developed a rhythm, and her nerves had settled, but the last 50 feet of the wall were perpendicular, and the strain on her fingers had proved too much, and, on 3 occasions, only Fenodri's quick reactions had saved her from coming off the rock. The sound of the dwarf's voice brought Susan out of her thoughts, and she saw that Colin was beginning the final stretch, the crucial 50 feet. He was lowering himself over the sharp ridge that marked the end of the inclined pitch, and it was punishing him no less than it had his sister. He would carry the bruises for days. And how Fenodri climbed with only one free hand was a marvel. He was nearing the end of his 3rd trip up and down the shaft, and there he was, taking Colin's weight on his shoulder and guiding him to the next hold. 20 feet more, Colin, and we shall be there. Bring your left hand down to the inside of your right knee. Your other hand will fit there too. Steady. Now lower yourself as far as your arms will let you. There is room for your left foot. Right hand out at your shoulders level, not that far. There, 6 inches down with your right foot. Finodri stepped onto the shelf. Now your left hand to the side of your hip. A minute later, Colin was standing beside Susan. We are not yet at the foot, the dwarf reminded them. See what awaits. He guided them down the shelf to the mouth of the lower end of the shaft. The shelf grew rapidly steeper and very smooth. There were no holds at all. What do we do now? Cried Susan. We slide. Oh, never fear, it is no great way, and there is sand to break your fall. The children remained apprehensive, but Finodri insisted that there was no danger, and, to prove his word, he sat at the top of the chute and pushed off with his hands. There was a swish, silence, and a soft bump. It is as I said, called Finodri, and he shone the light upwards. All right, said Susan. But, oh! The chute was far smoother than Susan had anticipated, and, caught off her guard, she tobogganed helplessly into the air and landed at the dwarf's feet with her knees in her stomach, winded for the second time in the space of an hour. It was small consolation that Colin fared no better. Finodri had not lied. There was sand, but it was wet and, consequently, hard. While the children lay croaking, Finodri cupped his hands to his mouth and shouted, Jorathro! An answering voice echoed in the shaft. We shall rest here, said Finodri. But we must not stay long, for if we do not win clear of the Earl delving by sunset, we shall have no choice but to stay there until the dawn, and that would be grim indeed. Nay then, said Jorathro, let us forgo our rest. He was standing on the shelf at the foot of the great wall. But how have you... I fell, shouted Jorathro merrily. See? And he leapt down to join the children and Finodri. His cloak whirled about him, and he landed lightly on his feet, with as little disturbance as if he had skipped from the bottom treads of a staircase. The foot of the shaft opened into a small chamber, 3 or 4 feet high, and it was flooded, except for the pyramid of sand in the middle. Finodri bade the others make themselves as comfortable as possible, but it was not easy to stay dry, and, at the same time, to be out of the path of any swart-scent boulders that might land in their midst. Colin and Susan divided the remains of the food and drink between the 4 of them, and as they ate, the dwarfs pieced together the events that had brought them so unexpectedly to hand in time to rescue Susan and to bring havoc among the Svarts. This was their story. Jorathro and Finodri were walking near Castle Rock when the kestrel Windhover brought news that Grimnir had risen from the lake and had entered St. Mary's Cliff. The dwarfs knew that where Grimnir was, there would be firefrost, and that this may be their chance. Cadolin was prowling in the hills towards Ragnarok to find out if word of the stone had spread, for he was as anxious as Grimnir to keep its present whereabouts a secret. He could not possibly come, so the dwarfs decided to attack alone, and in no time Finodri had gathered his armour, and they were on their way. They heard of the children's arrival from Windhover, whom they had arranged to meet in the cover of the garden next to St. Mary's Cliff. Grimnir and the Morrigan, said Windhover, were in an upper room. There was unpleasantness behind the curtains downstairs. The hounds were loose. Do you wait by the entrance wall, said Jorathro. Windhover shall take me where these morth-doers hide, and I shall disturb them, and, with Dernwyn, drive all thought of firefrost from their heads. Wait for a space after you hear me fall upon them. Seek the stone in the lower room, for there I think it will be, and so to Fundindelve, where I shall join you if I may. Then Jorathro went with the kestrel to the room under the eaves. It was as Colin and Susan had begun to suspect. He had the power of flight. It lay in his cloak of eagle feathers, a survival from the elder days and a token of great friendship. When his moment came, Finodri ran for the door. To his surprise it was open, and he entered warily. On finding the curtained room empty, he was perplexed, but he had no time to search further, for as he was about to try the kitchen door, it was thrown open, and Jorathro cannoned into him. There was savage joy stamped on his face as he spun Finodri into the cloakroom where the children had lately been hiding, and closed the door. Seconds later Grimnir stumbled out of the kitchen, followed by Shapeshifter. The empty room, the open door. "The dwarf has taken it!" screamed Shapeshifter, and they both rushed out into the mist. "Have you the stone?" whispered Finodri incredulously. "Nay, but it is in good hands." They came out from the cloakroom. The mist had rolled away. In the distance a hound bayed. "I could not kill the Morth-doers, since their magic is greater than my sword, but they will feel her smarts for many a day," Jorathor chuckled. "I came to join you in the end, but entering yonder room I saw two things to make me pause. There is a cupboard against the wall, and a hound of the Morrigan made clamour against it, but the door was closed, and I had seen what closed it. A small white hand, cousin, and firefrost shone upon the wrist. I slew the beast, the rest you know." Finodri ran into the kitchen. "Come out, children! Susan, Colin!" He seized the cupboard handle. "Oh, you will be remembered when—" He stared into the shaft and saw a square of wood begin to grow rapidly larger as it climbed towards him out of the far depths. "And it was but luck that brought us to you when we were beyond hope," said Jorathor. "If only we'd known!" cried Susan. "Aye," said Finodri, "if only. We should have been in Fundindel there now." The children told their story, and when they described the crossing of the plank, the dwarfs grew excited. "Hair of the Moondog!" shouted Jorathor. "And did you not go on?" "Oh yes," said Colin, "but the tunnel finished on a platform over a lake." Jorathor put both hands to his head and groaned in mock despair. "Had you but known it," said Finodri sadly. "The water is little more than a foot deep, and the way from there leads to the gate, not half a mile distant." After such a revelation the children had not the heart to talk. They huddled, wrapped in their thoughts, and their thoughts were the same. Here they sat, at the bottom of a shaft, at the end of the world. They had gained the Weirdstone of Brisingamen, but that success promised to be the beginning, and not the end, of danger, and where it would lead them they dared not think. "We must move now," said Finodri. When they switched on the light, Colin and Susan examined their surroundings in detail for the first time, and an awful truth dawned on them. There was no obvious way out of the chamber. 2 tunnels led off in opposite directions, but they were flooded, and the roofs dropped steadily to meet the green-tinged water. "Finodri, how do we get out of here?" "Aye, cousin," said Jorathor. "All the while since I came I have sought a way to leave, but I see none." Finodri nodded towards the smaller of the tunnels. "Did I not say that the road was hard? Colin, is the wrapping for your food proof against water?" "Yes, I think so. But then when we start, cover the light with it. You will have to trust my eyes alone for a time." "And may I have your covering for Valham, my cloak?" said Jorathor to Susan. He unbuckled his feathered cloak and rolled it tightly to fit into the sandwich bag, and Susan fastened it in her pack, which, if anything, seemed lighter for the load. "Put out the light," said Finodri, "and have courage."